Talk, 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 talk. Art of the Zodiac presents Talk, 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 Talk.
I guess I'll start by saying I'm Vivi Henriette of Art of the Zodiac, and you're Martha Fearnley of Martha Fearnley. And I feel like it's you're the moon and planets, but you're so much more than that.
Thank you.
Hollywood. Oh my God, Hollywood Star Tours.
Yes, yeah, my Substack, where I do astrology writing, Hollywood Star Tours. Yeah, I guess you could say I'm of that. That works for me.
I think so. I keep saying it's like I love. So you had me watch a movie. Well, you don't have. I asked.
I forced you to watch a film.
I asked for a homework assignment because like it's such a thrill. Like I'm like highly neurotic and I have to have like a mission to watch a film, which I know sounds ridiculous, but I get really excited because I know I'll talk to you. So then I like get to watch a film and I can talk about it with you.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, and this one was really exciting for multiple reasons because I think you really nailed it. But also just because like I felt like watching this film, I was like, oh fuck, like this is what Martha's head's like in this like really wonderful way. I just imagine like you just have watched so many films, you live with them, and then like the astrology comes alive through these films, which is what we really get through your Substack, which is why I like your approach to astrology so much.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I was watching this movie and I was like, oh, this is how I wonder, because I saw this movie when I was like 16 and didn't really get it. Like I watched it young and I think it stayed in my brain and now it's like defined how I approach a lot of things, but especially specifically using film to write about astrology.
Yeah. Should we introduce the film?
Yeah. A lot of suspense. Yeah, the film I had you watch was Los Angeles Plays Itself by Tom Anderson. It's I think completely unlicensed film. I don't think he had you can't find it anywhere. I'm surprised you can find it on Canopy, which is where I watched it at least.
Okay.
And sometimes it'll play like American Cinematheque. I think it was playing at the Egyptian like over the weekend, which I missed, which I'm sad about.
Oh.
Because he does not have the rights for any of the films that he uses in that movie. And it's actually quite hard to find. So I was happy that we could watch it.
Oh, I'm so excited. And could you describe the premise of the films for people who have no idea what we're talking about? Like, just describe the premise of the film.
Yeah, so it's Tom Anderson, who is a professor at CalArts and like an artist, and he goes through all of the representations of Los Angeles in film and uses the films and different representations of Los Angeles to talk about the history of LA, the history of LA as a film city, and also the history of Los Angeles as everything else that it is besides a city that has Hollywood in it. I think that's actually a big part of the film, is talking about the tension between Los Angeles as Hollywood and Los Angeles as an actual American city. And it's fun because it's like, as you go through I wanted to list out, I was like, I want to find the list of all the movies that he pulls because it's got to be like pages long. It's so many. But you kind of throughout the film get to realize that but he works with this thesis that LA is pretty inextricable from its representations.
Yeah.
But also the way that the representations fail in representing LA is also informative to how we think about the city. So it's very dense.
Totally dense. And I think when I was watching it, it was working on many levels, but for me, I was thinking about it in two distinct ways. One, as someone who just moved to LA and has nothing to do with like movies, but has a lot of so it was a really beautiful way of getting to know the city and like thinking about like what it's haunted by and the sort of layers. interesting. I'm from Detroit, so it feels like there's a lot of similarities and representation in city in that way. And so thinking about that, and then also really being beautiful because I know that you're from LA. So I was like, oh, this feels like I'm being gifted this like love story to like LA, or like, you know, like sort of love poem to LA in some ways by this person who's actually from here. So there was that sort of like initiation working. I was my experience.
Cool.
And then of course we were thinking about Jupiter and Gemini, this Gemini New Moon, and I was like, wow, like this total, like I'm totally feeling everything in Gemini squaring that Saturn in
Yes.
Pisces, right? Like you're getting the layers of like the sort of just, I think of Gemini as those sort of multiple layers of information. Like this was exactly it. I'll let you go explain that a little further because you did choose this film to think about the current astrological weather.
I did. It was one of those ones where I didn't really think about the astrological parallels too hard. It felt like a gut check for me where I was like, I think, well, maybe I did think about it because when I think about Gemini, and especially as I've been like feeling the Gemini energy get so strong in the last week, I've just noticed how quick everything has gotten and how much I've been like pulling references.
Yeah.
And like using references to define everything. And I think I do that anyway because we all have Gemini in our charts somewhere. So we're all. So it's just been interesting I'm like, yeah, there's something so meta about Gemini. And this film is very meta because it's a movie about movies. And it's very like, yeah, there's something so it's so quick, it's so chattery, it's so it seems to like there's something kind of deceptive about Gemini where you kind of think that you're working on the surface. But I think that Gemini, when you're working on the surface is the thing. And it's not that you're lacking depth. You're just like the surface material is the thing that you're understanding. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it totally does because I've been thinking about that a lot in my head of like how I'm someone who's a Gemini moon, so I feel this sort of chatter all the time. Like there's a certain sort of like multiplicity. I was always thinking of like swarming bees, or we could think of it like the collage of imagery just in the movie, like thinking about this idea that so it can feel really busy, it can feel very superficial, but then like you said when you were describing the film, it's like you can't like quite cut that off, right? So it's almost the investigation of the surface that leads us to the thing itself, and it's not always perfect, but it's more of the like you can't take it down to one thing, the way same way that you can't sort of define Los Angeles by one thing, right? So it's always going to be found in the conversation. Now I'm getting meta.
Well, this is the thing this is what's so funny about Gemini is I keep having conversations like this. And I find myself, I'm like, I cannot get out of meta. I don't even know what that means right now. It's very important, I feel, to be meta at this moment.
Totally.
Which is so funny. So yeah, I felt like this was, and I've also just on a weird sort of I don't know if this is like synchronistic. I guess it is. I've noticed that with Gemini, like Jupiter, Gemini transits, I get really obsessed with LA specifically. Like the last one was 12 years ago. I guess it was like 2012, 2013. And that's when I started. I've always kind of been really captivated by like people who write about LA as a city.
Yeah.
And I started reading like Mike Davis and like, God, what is her name? I had this book right here. And I can't see it. This book called Window Shopping. It's also a book about LA as a city, but like seen through media. It's just this weird thing that happens in Jupiter and Gemini as I get obsessed with LA.
And it's interesting, like you said, okay, you said I get so obsessed with LA, and then you immediately like rattled off the several books that feel kind of disparate. That was your sort of entrance into. So it's like, oh, I get obsessed with the multiplicity of Los Angeles, right? Or
I
like
get
LA.
Yes, exactly. I get obsessed with like people who write about. I get obsessed with writing about LA, which is so funny. But it's fun. Lots of people have done it in very cool ways.
Where is because I can't remember anyone's chart. This is like a debilitation of mine. What house is Gemini in your chart, if you don't mind sharing?
It's the 7th house, so I don't totally get the connection, but
Oh my God, I think I do. Right?
okay,
Like
tell
it's
me.
interesting. Like, well, the 7th house is our partnership, right? But it's also the mirror. Like the 7th house is what we look into to see ourselves, right? Like this is oftentimes, like you date people because you're trying to figure yourself out. And so it's interesting thinking like you're from Los Angeles, right? But it feels like maybe this sort of relationship with the city is more than just like I come from here. It's almost like I'm wondering what else happens during these periods. It's almost like you're looking, thinking about it this way, right? Like thinking about the ways in which you're finding your own narrative through these narratives about Los Angeles.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think I go about it in a very Gemini way, which is looking for like a thing about the thing. But I think that is true because I think I grew up in LA in a way that feels very like, I think Tom Anderson in the movie kind of draws this divide between the car people and the walking people.
Yeah.
So like car people, you can skit around the city and you can exist in certain contexts and you don't have to see a lot of the rest of it. And that was very much me and like my growing up. Like I went to school, friends had like it was very suburban. It was like kind of a suburban existence where I really didn't have to leave a certain milieu of people.
Yeah.
So it's weird. I feel like you can grow up in LA and not really understand it also.
How, because you've studied abroad, you've studied in other cities, right? You've spent a lot of time outside of LA. And how do you think that the city has opened up for you since you've been an adult living here? Like you've made a conscious choice to live here, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I think ooh, interesting. It's so funny. I feel like it's I think I just kind of realized it's maybe gonna be hard for me to live anywhere else. I don't really have I thought that I had that in me that like I want to live in I like romanticized other cities from like, oh, New York and London and all these other fancy foreign places. And then I went to them and I was like, okay, well, you guys are like uptight. Like you think you're so great. And like I just found myself just like a huge LA defender. And then moved back here and was like, yeah, all my friends are here. It's sunny. It's weird here. Everyone misunderstands LA and thinks it's like everybody like thinks it's one thing and it's not. Everyone thinks other cities are so fucking fascinating and that LA is like vapid and whatever. So I don't know if maybe it was like more of a defensive posture where I would like go other places and be like, it's not that nice.
I think LA is kind of, and I'm going to bring it back to the astrology, I swear.
Yeah.
It feels like similar to Detroit, which is again a place where I lived for a very long time. It feels like a secret city, and that like when I lived in LA in the past and I didn't really know people, it felt very alienating and like, oh God, like how do you just need a car? Like what are all these things? Like, am I just going to run into the Kardashians? Like it's just this sort of strange place. But since being here this time around, I feel very fortunate because I have a lot of friends that are from here, and it's and they're actually very like down to earth, really grounded, fascinating people. They just sort of live in this sort of city that has all of these sort of, again, surface buzz, but at the sort of core, it just feels like a place that has some, maybe that's the sort of trick to like living beneath the sort of underneath the Gemini buzz, right? They're like, okay, like how do we find sort of like the our pause in the sort of white noise around us?
Yeah, I think that's really lovely. I think it's because so something I've thought about a lot with Jupiter and Gemini, or something that keeps like ringing in my head, is the idea of like making big things little and little things big. Just be It's very literal because Jupiter's so big and Gemini's so little. And I think um I think you do kind of get used to that sense of overblown scale when you live in Los Angeles for a long time, or when you grow up here, because you start to realize that people come to the city with a lot of myths, and I'm sure this is true of other places. But LA, it feels like it's a really specific myth and it's a really specific story. And people get really overwhelmed with, like, I think they get overwhelmed with like illusions about what their life is supposed to look like here. And I think it can get kind of, if you don't have access to security here, it can get kind of dangerous and unsafe here, I think, especially if you're like trying to go into the film industry. And then I think if you live in this weird, I'm losing it. But I think if you live in this weird scale or weird sense of scale for a long time, you kind of start to know what it looks like. And you kind of start to know like what's actually big and like what's actually small. And like, I don't know, is this tracking?
That totally makes sense. And I'm trying to like suss it out here too. Like
That's the
I
threat.
was thinking about like the LA project feels, friends, different than like the New York project, right? Like New York is a city that's like so condensed, but like even though things can be like, if you go to New York and you're like, oh, I'm gonna like, I don't know, be an actor or something, right? Like there's a sense of like you understand the sort of the scale, but you're also sort of thrown into this sort of sardine. Like you can't like escape. Like there's something about like New York where even though you can understand the sense of scale, right? In a sense that like, like the sort of power hierarchy, but at the end of the day, like you're just sort of shoved with a bunch of different people and you can't escape that. Whereas like, I think there's like maybe it's more of this sort of air disparate Gemini quality of like LA, where it's like, you can't quite see things, right? Like things happen behind closed doors or in cars, right? So it's like, and I think that can be really ungrounding for people. It's not like you're like, oh, like I'm trying to like do this project, but like I live in my neighborhood and I see the same people every day. There's a sense of just like expansiveness that can almost feel like too big.
I agree. I think that's it. I think I think that's exactly it. It feels really there's like a lot of lying in LA. I think that that's a stereotype that people catch on to, and I think that that's true. Like I honestly, like, people are like, LA's so fake, and then the classic respond is like, no, they're not. But like, I think LA is super fake. Like, I think people in LA are very will say they say yes to everything, because you cannot, the idea of taking an iron out of the fire is like unthinkable. Like, people will say yes to you, they don't mean it. And I think in New York, the sense that I get, I've never lived long term in New York City, so I actually don't know what I'm talking about. But the vibe that I do get from that culture, and like from people that I know who grew up there, lived there, is like, that's not really part of it. You get no's in New York. In LA, you get yeses that don't lead anywhere.
That makes sense, right? That totally, and that, again, I haven't lived long term in New York, but it really like checks with my experience as well. But also just that, like, thinking about the yes feels very Gemini, right? Like, because it's like you're like, oh, of course, I want to say yes to all the things, and then maybe if we kind of bring it back to this like current new moon, right, with everything squaring Saturn and Pisces, which is like the sort of like anchor in the, you know, infinite choices of the universe, right? I think about there's something about like the pressure of like, yeah, I want to say yes to everything. Everything's great, all these images, but then and okay, I'm going to bring it back to the astrology. Thinking about this current new moon, right? Where we're very much feeling that, which totally feels and like there's like little lies, right? Like they're white lies. Like no, yes, but like it's not that I'm lying, it's just I didn't think it through. Um you know, and I've been thinking about this sort of new moon where everything is sort of stacked in Gemini and it's getting stared by this Saturn and Pisces, which totally to me feels like, okay, like you want to do all the things, but you only have one life. So it's not even that you can do all the things one at a time. It's like this is way too big. And like, what are you devoting your life to?
Yeah. Oh my God. I've been really, that's what I've been feeling. Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, because I feel like I've been having those conversations in my head for the past like couple days where I'm like, what am I doing? How much time do I have? There seems to be a lot of like time stuff going on with Gemini. Where just as soon as Jupiter moved into Gemini from Taurus, everything sped up to a degree that I was like, I actually thought was witchcraft. I was like, I didn't know that time could actually feel so different. And it does now that everything's in Gemini. And now we're finally getting the experience of the brakes being put on with Saturn and Pisces, which I was like curious to feel that. I wasn't sure what that would be like. But yeah.
Yeah, like I love you said it does feel like time has sped up in a very significant way. Also thinking about you know, Pluto being in Aquarius, and we know that we're now in this sort of age of air. So it feels like everything has sped up. And it's interesting because I think for some people that experience can be exhilarating. Like, yeah, finally movement again.
Yeah.
And for other people, I think the overwhelm has been really depressing. I don't know if you've noticed that for people in your life.
I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was Austin Coppock and like, I don't know, one of his lectures said something like was speaking specifically to Gemini placements of this idea that you can do everything, but you have to do, but not all at once, like one thing at a time. But again, I think that this sort of like Saturn is saying like, okay, but we literally like only have one life. So you literally can't do like all of these because again, it's not just like Gemini, it's Jupiter and Gemini. So I feel like a lot of us like feel compelled, or at least maybe I do, to like having all these big ideas that aren't just kind of like ideas I can fit into one lifetime. But I think the feeling of this moment is like, oh, I want to live 10 lives right now. And I think that new moon is sort of like the Saturn speaking to this new moon is sort of forcing us into a choice point. Like you are mortal. You get one life.
You get one time. You have to say no to some stuff. It's so funny. It's all cheery in Gemini. And then we remember Saturn is there. And it's actually going to be a process of no's. Just so annoying. Cause I was like, ooh, Gemini. Okay, here we go. We're like... And then I remembered, this is actually, there's some no's involved here as well.
Well, coming back to your like ideas of people in LA lie, right? I think there's that Gemini of like, no, I could do it all. Like you really like that like optimism that the dark side is like when reality hits of like, it's like, I didn't necessarily mean to lie. I just only have so much time.
Okay. And this is so fun because one of my favorite this is in the Los Angeles plays itself, and it's also a part of Mike Davis talks about this in his book about LA City of Courts that I have read the first quarter of like 3 times. It's also dense. But talking about the way that like I think the dashed dream of LA is also such a prevalent story in the construction of the city as a imaginary space as well. Yeah. Like as soon as kind of the 30s hit and the war and World War II hit, and LA was no longer this like glittering white metropolis, and it actually had like people of other races were living there. It had like I think it was really advertised in its beginnings as like kind of a place for white people from the East Coast to come to and like have a beach vacation.
Yeah.
And then it of course became like a city with like industries and different, it's just like actually a place instead of a vacation spot. And I think after the Depression, there was like even further class divisions. The middle class became kind of really disillusioned with this city that they were living in that had been promised to be this. And that's when we started getting noir stuff, like noir films and books about Los Angeles specifically. So I think maybe that's a really fun kind of like Saturn and Pisces squaring Gemini parallel, as well as like this sense of disappointment and darkness being part of the just part of the story.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I love that. And I was thinking like in people's lives, I could totally feel how that would track, right? Like in your own life, sort of like there was that moment of like, oh, there are all these options, but the sort of the disappointment of having to choose.
Yeah.
Have you had any good I think I've had a couple good stories come up like that. Have you so far?
About the disappointment of having to choose.
Uh-huh.
I think it being in my wait, let me think. Do you what are your stories? I'll think.
No, it was a little one. It was just really small, but I'm going away this weekend with a friend who secured an Airbnb that's non-refundable. And like another friend reached out to me. I was like, oh, I have this like amazing like gig tarot reading. And I was like, that's so amazing. I like want to do them both, but it's literally impossible. Like I can figure out a way to like, okay, like we'll rearrange things, but it was just like this impossibility and I had to choose. It was like deeply frustrating because it was like Jupiter too. They're like both really good things. But I
Yeah.
had to, I know I sound like such a brat. I'm like, but I had to choose. And I think that that's a really like literal way that this astrology is showing up for people.
Yeah, I agree with that. I haven't had a literal instance like that.
Yeah.
I think I've been just feeling this, I just have this like eternal story in my head. And maybe this is having mutable things on the angular houses. It's like,
Yeah.
it's just bringing up an eternal thing. But like, I'll have this eternal story in my head where I have to choose if I want to work in the industry or not, which is, again, very Los Angeles. And like, it's not like anyone's offering me a job in the industry necessarily on a silver platter, but I just have this conflict in my head at all times. And it's really been highlighted, I think, as soon as everything went into Gemini and squared Saturn and Pisces, which has been
Is
interesting.
you're so wait. Do you have Jupiter in Sag?
Jupiter's in Libra for me.
Why I was just making that up. Okay.
My rising Sag.
Yeah, yeah. I knew that. I was just trying to think. I was like, are you a Gemini?
Just in case you forgot.
Jupiter first house. No. It's interesting. Well, I'm kind of curious. Maybe this is a little off topic, but when I think of Sag rising, I think of their like wanting. Like, there's also that desire for multiplicity, but perhaps in a different way, right? Where I think like Gemini wants all the ideas, like Sagittarius wants all the experiences. And so is that part of your own, like, do you have a restlessness, even though you like love this place? How does your Sag rising show up?
I think the restlessness for experiences is really big for me. Like, I think that's why I don't like choosing things. Because I'm like, can't I just, honestly, if someone said you can have a life, and maybe this is a gift I could give to myself, but if you could have a life where you just get to experience a bunch of things and people pay you for it, I would take it. I would, you know what I mean? Like, I think most of the things I've done have been for the purpose of experience.
Well, that's interesting because it feels like on multiple levels, by the way, I think multiplicity are like the the keywords for today's recording.
Yeah.
You act, you perform, which feels like a way to sort of embody different experiences, but then also you like just have like an encyclopedic knowledge of film, which means you're watching a lot of experiences and then synthesizing them through your writing, which feels like you've done it. You're living the dream.
Now the key is somebody just has to pay me to do it, and then we're good. And I figured it out. So I guess this is a way of me announcing that I'm going to start doing paid tiers on this on my Substack.
So you're telling me that your work in the planetary comic troupe, Planets, is not paying all of your bills?
You think, because it sounds like something that would be so lucrative, but no. Clowning doesn't pay much these days, unfortunately. It's not like it used to be.
That sounded like it was not a hit. Actually, when I went to see you perform, I was fascinated because there were so many people, which is really wonderful. You're like, wow, like this is the most niche performance ever. And there's so many people here. So it's promising. That's exciting.
I have big, I feel like Planets is, this is, listen, Blair Boken, genius astrologer. I have total trust that this is a good idea. And I feel like it's weird. I've heard from people in the group, I'm not very like plugged in a way that a lot of them are, but a lot of people have been like, no, people like us. And that's great. That's so cool.
People love you because I posted something about you on my page, and actually I was at NORWAC, and every time I run into an astrologer who like glances, like I either mention plants, or they see something, and like whether it be an interview with you, and they just get so stoked. They're like, this is the greatest thing ever. I think I told you the president of NCGR reached out to me and was like, how do we get them? How do we get them to perform at? I don't know, because they're not having an in-person conference, but it's very exciting. Which, for those who like have no idea what we're talking about, do you want to once again describe planets? I refuse to just say planets. It feels like I'm cheapening your brand.
No, it's okay. I think we call it planets.
I know you can, but I feel like I have to give it the respect.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Planets is it's like an alt comedy clown troupe put together by Blair Boken, who's like a seasoned astrologer and clown. And we perform the chart of the moment depending on what show time we're booked. Or we also have done like birthdays. We've done birth charts. And each of us plays, which, that we've done that once and it was really fun. And the person, God bless them, I think was baffled, but it was a good time. We each of the performers play a planet. And we make a little story based off the chart.
And you usually play the moon. This is important.
This is,
And so maybe we could stick to by the way, some people have like podcasts, I realize, where they like talk about like the weather for the week, and I just like can't do that. This is a rambling conversation. So if you're here for it, here we go. But last time I saw you played the Virgo moon. And so now, since just thinking the fact that we have the Gemini New Moon is upon us, what do you think of the differences between Gemini and Virgo?
Oh my God, fun. I think I was just talking about this actually with Cam, who's about also, who I have a podcast with, and is also on Planets. And I think we're talking about like the difference being kind of the perfecting instinct of Virgo, where Gemini will info gather and will like loves to live in all of the data that it's collected, and then Virgo, I feel, kind of wants to make it make sense and make it, and like maybe do some like chopping away and shaping, I think. Because because I felt like when I was performing Virgo Moon, my instinct was very much to like critique, and I think Virgos are very good at being critical, whereas Geminis are good at I think also being critical, but just in a different way. There's maybe less like it doesn't all have to be quite right in Gemini, which I think is part of the fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now that you're talking, I'm thinking like, okay, because it's not just thinking about this new moon is fascinating because it's a new moon, but then Venus is like still hanging on to the degree of the sun, right? So there's like this cazimi and I have Jupiter and Gemini. It's a very big project. So I think there is something, and then of course Saturn squaring. It feels like this particular new moon, there's going to be maybe a choice or something that we're kind of like forced to make. And I'm curious to think about when everything starts to move, like the sun, Jupiter's gonna be a while, but like maybe sun moves into Virgo. I'm wondering like how that will play out. If there'll be some sort of like choice point that happens there.
Oh, I wonder, like you think when it opposes Saturn.
Yeah, because then I'll square all these planets as well. So I'm so curious to see like the transits on the sort of mutable axis and thinking about like what that conversation looks like. Because right now I think we're overwhelmed. Like we're so far thrown in sort of the clutter of our choices and thinking about the next few months, like how that sort of comes together for people.
Well, I think that's also interesting because aren't we going to get an eclipse in September in Virgo and Pisces?
Yeah, because it's doing the swap over thing.
I think so. Yeah.
It's a very technical term, by the way. Swap over thing.
I was like, yes, yeah.
We have like, because I think we have one more technical eclipse in Libra, and then that's like the end of it. But we have the like transition period.
Yeah, it's doing that little like, that little dance back and forth.
Yeah. Ooh.
Where I have all these like big decisions to make, and
You do.
go. I do.
I'm saying you're just in general are saying you have these big decisions to make.
Yeah. I think that, I mean, right? If everything's in Gemini and then it's gonna get kind of there's like an answer happening in Virgo. There's also an eclipse in Virgo.
Yeah.
Feel higher stakes.
Yeah. How do you, in your practice, this is actually, it's a very personal question, but like, how do you work with the astrology, like in your lived life? So for instance, like thinking about this Gemini new moon, right? Like, how do you kind of like take watch of it, work with it? There we go.
I think I'm probably less. I don't do any sort of like rituals really. I think I more will. I try to really observe it and what it's asking of me. And I try to be cautious as well. I've been trying to be cautious with this one specifically because I've noticed that I've noticed how kind of also, I mean, you're a Gemini moon, so you maybe have more access to this energy than I do because I don't live in it. But it's so to me, it can manifest as very manic. So I've been thinking a lot about like the choices you can make when a sign is so emphasized like this to really immerse yourself in it, and also what kind of stopgaps do you have to put in place so that you don't get like, I can't sleep so good right now. I've stopped stretching as much. It's like I've stopped meditating because I have so much I want to do. So I've just noticed I'm like, I think you do have to like think about the response, like the response to the transit as well as like noticing the energy.
That totally makes sense. Like I'm getting like a visual, like thinking about what you're saying about the inability to sleep and meditate and that sort of like chaotic energy. Like I can literally like I feel like I close my eyes and almost like a film. I have like visions of all the things that I need to do and want to do. And you're right. I think that manic energy is totally real. And there's something about maybe in this particular moment, like holding on to Saturn and being like, okay, like how do I like find a life support here? Because I feel it's like everyone's like, oh, this new moon is so exciting. And I'm like, it kind of feels like we're on speed. Yeah, people are because it's like, the benefics are there, Mars is just hanging out. But it feels like you're just kind of like, yeah, like you're like on speed or something, and everything's really exciting, and there's just everything's potential. There's all these ideas, all these great ideas. And then it's like, okay, but like let's just be aware that we're gonna come down and like they may not sound so cute once they hit reality. Right. Like
Yeah, I think that
once we sober up, like what is left? Maybe there's a learning experience, but I think we need to like all like maybe that's the sort of lesson here of this particular lunation is like maybe not make the big life decisions right now.
Yeah, I think that that's true. I feel like people get really excited when the benefics, because the benefics have been so close to each other, I think, since everything went into Taurus, I guess.
Yeah.
And everything I see, like forecast or like little video, is like, this is the best new moon of the year. I'm like, you're crazy. Which is maybe my Saturnian signature coming in, where I'm like, nothing's that good. Relax.
No, I totally agree. The benefics will fuck you up.
People get so excited about them, and I think that that's great and fine. I just get I'm just always cautious, I guess. And especially just knowing that Saturn is there, I'm like, well, it'll be good for some people, sure.
I think it's almost our over enthusiasm that can harm us, if that makes sense. Right.
Yeah.
It's almost like good things can be good and maybe just accept and just be like, okay, this is a moment where I don't feel like the universe is tearing me apart from the limbs, but like just maybe sit with that knowledge, because I think we can oftentimes with like things like this, like overhype ourselves. And it's like we're setting ourselves up for disappointment. It's like we are the transit. Like we like then like ignore Saturn and we just like get these big inflated ideas of goodness, and then Saturn comes and pops our bubble.
Yeah. I think I just am also always aware of like, yeah, I think that's a great way to put it, because I just saw a video the other day and I was like kind of surprised. I was like, why are we not talking about Saturn in this particular lunation? Like, why is it being left out of the narrative? Why is everyone forgetting? And I was also talking about this with Cam, that like, depending on your natal chart,
Yeah.
things will hit differently. So like, sure, Gemini is going to be fun for some people, but like, what if it's your 12th house? What then?
Yeah. I mean, this is, it's interesting. I was just having this conversation myself as well, thinking about even like sect considerations, right? So
Yeah,
if
totally.
you're born at night and, Jupiter is your out of sect benefic, not that like, Jupiter's trying to, again, fuck you up, but like it may become in like, it may show up in ways that feel a lot less stimulating and exciting than, right, if Jupiter is your big like moneymaker.
Yeah, it's just interesting. It is just interesting that like the way that people talk about the astrology is reflective of the astrology.
By the way, I feel like this conversation got a little strange only because there's technical difficulties, and I'm praying that my computer doesn't die, which I don't. This is, I don't know what, maybe this is like, I feel like since this sort of Gemini buildup, like it feels very Mercury retrograde. I know it's not, but there's something about technology that has been failing me all week.
Yeah, this has been happening to me all week. It's like everything stopped working.
Okay, good. So there's that. I'm not alone. I'm curious because I also, so speaking of, you've mentioned Cam a few times already, and you two have a podcast, which I haven't actually had a chance to sit down and talk to you about. Could you tell me a little bit more about your new podcast and your project?
Yeah, so Cam Farmer, who is Pluto, also sometimes Saturn and planets, and I just were starting to like as we were becoming friends, we were just like leaving each other voice notes all the time about like astrology. Just we would get in these like really long exchanges about transits that were happening. And then one day Cam was like, should we just record this and like put it out there?
Yeah.
So we've just started doing a weekly podcast called Planets du Jour. And it's us kind of just talking about what the transits feel like and having a conversation based off of them. Similar to, I think, kind of what you do with your podcast, where you'll talk to people like during the transit about the transit. Yeah, and it's just been fun and like casual and a nice way to keep talking about astrology. And I think we're still figuring it out. It's only been 2 episodes, so we're still coming up with a thesis.
Do you think, I really hope, what was that? God, I haven't listened to it in like 1,000 years because like I'm old and also I'll just go through periods. But is it Comedy Bang Bang where they bring in like the fake guests? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking like it would be like I'm like, oh, maybe you have like it's a like astro like Comedy Bang Bang, and I feel like it would be great. You guys can make appearances as the planets since you do that already. Like that would be an amazing podcast. I mean, I know you're not asking for ideas, but I'm just gonna like solicit that one because I
love that. I have thought about that before in context of planets, where I'm like, I think Blair's maybe mentioned wanting to do something, not quite like that, but doing more video stuff or recorded things. I think that would be so fun. I love the idea of taking it, like having people like interviewing the planets as characters.
Yeah,
that sounds so fun.
But like a podcast, like, by the way, your collaborator, it's Blair, right? Like, I got confused because I said Cam and I think I'm wrong.
No, you're right. You're right. Cam is my collaborator on the podcast. Yes.
Okay, Blair, and then Blair is also in Planets. There's so many people I get confused.
I know there's like 10 to 11 people. So.
Okay.
I'll pitch it. I'm seeing them today. So
yeah. Oh no, I even mean with like you and Cam, that'd be like really cute. You can like bring in having conversations with the planets for your personal podcast.
Oh, that would be really cute. They do need to talk more. I feel that the planets, we do so much talking about them.
Yeah.
They need to speak for themselves.
Don't you love it too, by the way? Like, you're like, oh, I have all these things I need to do. And I'm sort of like wrapping up this podcast by telling you things. I'm like, can you just do this other thing that's really great? Like, can you just bring in all the planets and make them talk in your podcast? Like, I'm now giving you direction. You're like, sure, I'll think about it. And you're like, oh, but no, like.
No, I'm used to this. Well, also in Gemini style, I wrote it down. So, it's like and I'm looking at it. It's so funny. I'm like looking at my whiteboard is right behind my computer. And I'm like, I have like 100 ideas on here of like things I have to do. And I wrote them all down within the last week. So I say keep them coming. It is the season.
Man, I can't get over this like internet thing not working.
It is not working, and I don't know what I look like right now.
I don't know what I look like. It's just frozen. This has literally happened to me all week. My like just computer dies, the internet goes out. So
no.
This is where we are. But this is good because it held on to the end of this conversation, and which is really exciting. So you and I've solicited you to co-host a Los Angeles Astro Salon at the Philosophical Research Society with me at the end of July. So that's something that's coming up that I'm very excited to share with the world, and we'll be sharing that in all those places. What else? Anything else? How can people get a hold of you?
You can get a hold of me at cowboywife1 on Instagram, my decades old username. I won't let go of. And then my Substack, Hollywood Star Tours. I think those are 2 good ones.
there are no parents, no other adults, no one to interfere with the fun.